They're so interested in us. Isn't it nice to know we're the object of such curiosity? Hope you guys are having fun. And while we're setting up, I made a list just this week of some of the books that had influenced my life, and I got curious about when they were first published. And of course, my interest was basically on personal development. That's why I find all of this cosmic research that many of you have done is so exciting, because it does mirror it. But I'd like to just read to you quickly, while they're setting up this new computer system, a list of these books. Probably some of you have read a number of these, but I think the sequence of the chapters of development is interesting in itself. The first book that I remember that really grabbed me was As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. You know, when it was published, 1903. Isn't that interesting? And again, back to cycles, it was like The Transcendentalist or something like that. It was a whole group of people. And of course, How to Get What You Want by Wallace Wattles came out in 1907, which is the basis of The Secret and all of that. And it wasn't copyrighted, so a lot of people have cobbled information from that. The Prophet by Khalil Gibran came out in 1923. How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie, 1936. Think and Grow Rich, of course, by Napoleon Hill, 1937. Isn't that interesting? Right in the Depression, when it was time for retooling and more open thinking. The Alcoholics Anonymous book came out in 1939. Autobiography of a Yogi was 1946. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, 1946. In 1949, Joseph Campbell published The Hero with a Thousand Faces, the beginning of many of his books on world mythology. And then, of course, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, 1952. That was a landmark. Then it kind of went into a wilder phase with On the Road with Jack Kerouac, 1957, you know, and the Beat Generation and Ginsberg and Burroughs and all of those guys. And then Maxwell Maltz wrote the first popular sort of cross-cultural book called Psycho-Cybernetics. Do you remember that? 1960. That was a seminal work, wasn't it? Then, of course, I put in Jonathan Livingston Seagull, 1970. Isn't that a great book? It's worth reading any time, isn't it? Never gets old. What Color's Your Parachute was also 1970. Be Here Now, my buddy Ram Dass, 1971. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, 1974. Life After Life, that's what we're talking about now, you know, In Between Lives and so forth, by Raymond Moody was 75. Your Erroneous Zones, Wayne Dyer, 76. The Road Less Traveled, M. Scott Peck, 1978. Love is Letting Go of Fear, Gerald Jampolsky. And then Feeling Good, Dr. David Burns, you know, talking about emotional awareness. Failing Forward, John Maxwell, that Protestant minister that wrote such fun books. You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay, of course. Getting What You Want, Harville Hendricks, 1988. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think everybody probably read that, 89. The Seat of the Soul, Gary Zukav, wonderful guy, 89. Awaken the Giant Within You, Tony Robbins, 92. The Artist Way, which started all of us journaling, by Julia Cameron in 92. And on and on and on, including Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, Brad Blanton, Don Needle Walsh, Eckhart Tolle, Don Miguel Ruiz, Robert Kiyosaki, Debbie Ford, Spencer Johnson, Rick Warren, and on and on and on. And just to close, I made a list of what I thought that these wonderful souls, like our next speaker, are bringing to us. And I think this is the evolution of the message of our time. It's 7 different things I wrote down. This is, you know, one reporter's opinion. The core lessons are: number 1, explore, tune in with a big picture, and find out the why that drives you. Number 2, understand. Know how your thoughts and feelings are creating your reality. Number 3, focus. Be effective, not efficient. Number 4, innovate, embrace failure, and keep on keeping on. Number 5, live in the present, renounce judgment and negative thinking. And number 6 is mastery. Success comes from practice and learning from others. And finally, cooperate, think win-win. So these are things that I think we've learned in our, generation. Isn't that an amazing accomplishment that these are all familiar to us where they weren't to Grandma and Grandpa? And Scott's going to talk to us about patterns And I think it's so valuable, Scott, to hear your information, because it's so great. If you can understand one thing, we can understand all things, because they're all interrelated and based on these patterns. I'm excited to hear your class today.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you so much. So my Secrets in Plain Sight films and books are focused on finding patterns in art, architecture, urban design, and the cosmos. The way I work is I tend to think visually, and I tend to make illustrations of these patterns when I find them. So I'd like to share with you 70 of my most recent illustrations, and I've sequenced them in a way that tells a story. So this first one here is called The Dream of Osiris. And I'd just like to walk you through my process just on this one image to give you a sense of how I come up with an illustration like this. And this started with the Great Pyramid, and it's shown there in yellow, the overall outline with the characteristic slope angle of 51 degrees, 51 minutes. And I just started with a simple question of what is the largest square that I could fit inside of that shape? And I played with the square, in this orientation, and then I rotated it 45 degrees, and I found that the square in red is the largest square that can fit in the Great Pyramid, okay? And then I circumscribed that square with a circle and drew a circle from the apex of the pyramid down to where they're tangent. And then I measured it, and I was doing all of this in AutoCAD, and I measured the circles and realized that this is the exact Moon-Earth proportion. So just with that simple move, it comes right out of the pyramid. Then I took a 3D model of the Earth and rotated it around its axis so that the Giza meridian would line up with the center of the square. Okay? Then I drew the next square in, 45 degrees. And then I just had this inspiration thinking of the spine of the Earth and the spine of the body to superimpose a meditator over that. And what's amazing is the correlation then between the heart of Africa and the source of the Nile corresponds with the heart of a human being. And then the flow of the Nile goes up the spine to the third eye. And this red dot is actually located where the Great Pyramid is, at Giza. So the Great Pyramid therefore represents the third eye, or a pyramid of enlightenment. And the meditator fits perfectly when you consider that that has to have a crown, rather tall hat. And the crown of Osiris just fits perfectly. So that's how the illustration came together. So I just follow my intuition in that example. But I don't always just make pretty pictures. Sometimes I do analysis. And here's an example of the dimensions of the Great Pyramid. And I had the intuition to inscribe an equilateral triangle inside of that and include its measurements. And then I simply took ratios, okay? So 7341 is the face length, and 4535 is half the base width, and that's phi to a very high precision, And then these other ratios encode 4 over pi and e. But E wasn't invented until the 18th century, but there's a big question of whether mathematics is invented or simply discovered. Is it there already? And Alan Green talked about this earlier. This diagram shows how the Great Pyramid squares the circle. So this is another layer of information that's encoded within it. And people have been trying to square the circle for millennia, and yet it was proven in the 19th century that this is impossible. But that doesn't stop people from trying, because it's impossible because of the transcendental nature of pi. You can never really rationalize pi. But people still want to square the circle because it's a way of reconciling opposites, of bringing the curved together with the straight, or the feminine and the masculine together, or the finite with the infinite. And so what I did in this diagram is not only to show that the Great Pyramid's form squares the circle, which is well known, but I show the diagonals have lengths of 1.111 when the circle's radius is 1. And that's kind of a key, because in my research I find that these repetitive digits are really a signature element that indicates that you're on the right track. So I then asked the question, well, what if, squaring the circle is something people have been doing for thousands of years? Has anybody ever tried to cube the sphere, to take it up a level, right? And I found that there is a way of doing that, and again, it's not exact, but it's within less than 1% off. And the key to doing that is to use the golden rectangle. And this is the way I tend to illustrate the golden rectangle, with these colors and this spiral. But if you say that the volumes are equal, then and the edge of the cube is 1, then the radius of the sphere would be 1 over phi. So isn't that beautiful, in a way, that the golden ratio is the key to cubing the sphere? And I think it's important to understand what the golden ratio is, right? I think it's the most succinct expression of the concept as above, so below in the universal language of mathematics. And more specifically, what it is you can take any line segment and divide it in one unique point, such that the whole is to the larger as the larger is to the smaller. And so that concept encodes two different levels, doesn't it? The whole to the larger on one side, the larger to the smaller on the other side. So it has the macrocosm and the microcosm built into it. These are continued fractions. And so you don't have to understand this, but just try to appreciate the beauty of it. So this is the golden ratio, phi. And if you express it in terms of a continued fraction, all of the numerators and denominators are unity. So it's a way that unity folds in on itself. And therefore it's utterly fundamental to math. It's not just an abstract constant that we use to measure something, but it's really part of the nature of mathematics itself. And I also investigated the continued fractions for 4 over pi and e, which are all encoded in the Great Pyramid. And they have 3 of the most fundamental expressions for continued fractions of any examples that I could find. And e in particular is very beautiful when you break it up like this, where you have the principal and the interest, And it's all the natural numbers acting as numerators and denominators. And Google, when they had their IPO in 2004, they raised $1 billion. Perhaps because the founders are mathematicians and they understand not only the math, but the fact that it's the basis of the maximum return on an investment. And that worked out pretty well for them. So here's a way of looking at the golden rectangle in terms of continued fractions. And if you use this notation, then you see that it's unity folding in on itself in this beautiful spiral that goes on forever. And this smaller rectangle in black has the exact same proportions as the larger. So you can imagine just copying all of that, scaling it down, and fitting it inside the box, and it goes on forever. This is a way of expressing the golden ratio in terms of exponents. So if you fold in, you go phi, 1 over phi, 1 over phi squared, 1 over phi cubed, and so on. If you go the other way, it just goes phi, phi squared, phi cubed, and so on. So it's a beautiful spiral. And then this illustration shows how the Great Pyramids form arises directly out of a consideration of the golden rectangle. I just put 2 golden rectangles next to each other, okay? And the 51-degree, 51-minute angle arises out of this geometry. And not only that, but this primary division here carries up through here and indicates how big this circle has to be so that it's perfectly tangent within the Great Pyramid. You see that? So it's just a really beautiful harmony that arises in that particular form. And part of what I do is look at Google Earth, and I've done a lot of research using Google Earth and using the publicly available satellite data. And one of the things I asked myself one time was, what is the longest possible distance that you could ever have on land, a straight line distance? Now, because the Earth is round, it's not just a straight line, it's actually a great circle arc, and that great circle arc has its center at the center of the Earth. But when viewed from above, it looks like a line. here in red, okay? And I played a lot with the endpoints to find the very longest possible distance that you can get, and it turns out that line has to pass through the Sinai here, okay, in order to get a lot of Africa in it. There's nowhere else on Earth that you get this long of a line. And it turns out that Giza is at the golden ratio on that line, and that's 99.9% accurate. And the only way that someone could figure that out would be that they would have to have global knowledge. Not only that, but they'd have to have accurate global knowledge, the kind of knowledge that we've only had for about 10 years with GPS data. Okay, so Livio Stecchini discovered in the 70s that the Great Pyramid is a model of the Earth in 1 to 43,200 scale. And he shows that the height of the Great Pyramid corresponds with the polar radius of the Earth, and that the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid corresponds with the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And all you have to do is measure this in any units and scale it up by 43,200, and there you have the size of the Earth. So, I mean, obviously the people who designed that not only designed it in proportion, but they used this scale to encode that right there in Giza. And that's a key number, 432. Joseph Campbell called it the most important number to all of the cultures, And it ties in with this doubling sequence, 864 is twice 432. And these are some of the patterns that I've found in our local environment, where we have 86,400 seconds in a day. It's exactly 24 hours. And the sun is 864,000 miles to a 99.9% accuracy. And a lot of people have heard this before. This was in my movie, but this is new information that Sirius is 8.64 light years from our sun. And that is exact. That is within the tolerance of error in the measurement. And then the galactic center is 8,640 parsecs away. But that's only 98% accurate because we don't really know exactly where the galactic center is. It's a supermassive black hole and we can't pinpoint it. But I suspect it's right on the money. Parsecs are parallel seconds of arc, and it's the way that astronomers tend to measure things. Now this is the Great Pyramid again, the east elevation. And what I did here is I inscribed 4 tangent circles within it. And I was really amazed when I'm in AutoCAD measuring this, and I'm like, are you serious? The radius is 864 inches. And up here, the diameter is 86.4 feet. How is that? Are feet and inches encoded in the Great Pyramid? That presents a problem because of our understanding of these units of measure. But as you'll see, bear with me, they arise out of the geometry of the Earth itself. So here is the Great Pyramid again with that central circle representing the Earth. And in this diagram I said, well, what if this has a radius of 1? Okay, that's how I started it. So if this has a radius of 1, what happens next? You just measure things and you find that the face is then 3.33. And I couldn't figure out the base for the longest time until I divided it by 3.33, because it's the product of 3.33 times 1.2345678 9. I'm an architect by training, and I've written many books on AutoCAD, so I really know what I'm talking about when it comes to measurement. So also, the golden ratio is the key here on multiple levels of proportioning this diagram. Now, this is true in any units of measure. It's a system of proportion. Here's an image that shows that same equilateral triangle that I had shown earlier, but this time it's green. But now we're looking at the absolute measures in imperial units. And this really blew my mind again when I measured it, because here's the Great Pyramid's mean base width, 755 feet 9 inches, right? Well, then you measure the equilateral triangle and it's 555.5 feet, which equals 6,666 inches. But I'd heard those numbers before because that is the height of the Washington Monument. And so clearly the same mind understood both of these. Here's another way of looking at it. I went deeper into the equilateral triangle and I inscribed these two circles and then measured them. This circumference is a third of the base perimeter. That's quite unexpected. And then this circumference up here is 333.3 feet. Here's another diagram that shows all sevens. The yellow and blue circles are equal sized, and they both have a circumference of this value. Here's the circumference of the green circle. Here's the circumcircle around the Great Pyramid itself. Look at that. If that's not a signature of intelligence, then I really don't know what is. Now, John Michell, who's no longer living, unfortunately, is kind of the grandfather of the Earth mysteries, and he found an equation that encodes the English foot as a unit of measure that comes directly out of measuring the Earth's equatorial circumference. And that equation is really simple. It's the number of days in the year times the number of degrees in a circle times 1,000. And this makes me speculate that perhaps when they invented this unit, the unit was originally 1,000 feet. And then they just divided it by 1,000 to give a convenient size. But that's super accurate, 99.998%. This diagram, I illustrated it, but it was the idea of Don Barone when I was Graham Hancock's Author of the Month on the forum. He pointed this out, and I made the illustration. And it shows that there's a connection between furlongs, miles, and inches. And this connection requires that you have detailed information about the Moon-Earth system, because this number is the number of inches in a mile. It's 5,280 times 12. And yet that's the number of furlongs in the diameter of the Earth. And that's the number of miles in the circumference of a circle that goes around the Earth and Moon put together as shown. So what this indicates is that all of those units are an interlocking system that were designed at the same time by someone who had detailed astronomical knowledge. So a lot of people, including John Michell, believed that the imperial system was where it was really at, and that was how you had to measure the Earth, and the metric system was just bunk. But that's not true. There's a relationship between the metric system and the imperial system, and that's the golden rectangle. You see this right here? This is 1 pixel off, which is about 0.5%. That's the difference there. But a mile is really 0.5% off of being 5 kilometers. And that's really no accident. Now, the metric system was originally defined by measuring 10 million units from pole to equator along the surface. That's 10,000 kilometers. But it's also true that 10,000 times the square root of 5 kilometers is the polar diameter of the Earth. Or 10,000 times 5 kilometers is the combined diameter of Moon and Earth. I mean, that's really very beautiful. And this is very accurate, 99.97% in both cases there. So the metric system arises directly out of considering the Earth. And here's something I found in Google Earth. Okay, so one time I was in Google Earth Pro and I was drawing a circle from the North Pole, and I said, what if I drew it with a radius of 3,333.33 kilometers, just to see what happens, right? I do that, then I look at the circumference of that circle, and it's exactly equal to the distance from the North Pole to the South Pole. Think about that. That means that the repetitive digits come directly out of measuring the Earth. This circle has a curved radius, you know? It's measuring the Earth itself. Now, if you look at the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, the proportions are well known, and they encode this beautiful 3, 4, 5 triangle in 3 dimensions. But if you multiply all of these proportions by phi squared, it gives you these numbers here. Well, the actual measure is the same numbers of meters. So whoever designed that understood meters. Here's a diagram I made with the golden rectangle on the bottom. And a golden rectangle is always divided into 1 plus 1 over phi. 1 plus 1 over phi equals phi. So I took the 1, represented by a circle, and I put it up here. And then I said, oh, damn, there's a little bit left, you know? Well, that's intentional. And that is the pyramidion there. And the height of that is 10 to the 1 over phi meters. So again, it shows how the meters are part of the design. And now here's an incredible discovery that was, I made the illustration and I added to it. But the original discovery is Gary Osborne's work. And he made this triangle with a base of pi and a height of e. Okay? And then I added this. This measurement is 10 to the 1 over phi, right? Do you remember this? It's the same. See? In meters. Here's the same number. And the perimeter of that triangle is 10. 99.9% accurate. Gary Osborne noted that if you draw a line from the 2/3 point up here, so it's 33.3% down and 66.6% there, you do that, it encodes the angle right here, 29.9792458 degrees. Well, guess what that is, guys? It's light speed in meters per second. And not only that, but then the whole triangle's angle encodes the latitude of Earth's geographical center, calculated by Holger Isenberg in 2003. That's a point in northern Turkey. And this triangle that is composed of 3 of the world's most important mathematical constants, phi, e, and pi, encodes that location. So this is more than a human conspiracy, right? This is part of the Earth. The latitude that I was just mentioning there of the, right here, this one, that is the latitude of the Great Pyramid. And this was initially noted by Jim Branson in 2001, but he didn't have the line even close to the Great Pyramid. It was just somewhere in Cairo, right? And then as information became more and more accurate in the ensuing years, John Charles Webb Jr. noted that it was within the Great Pyramid's volume, and he thought it was within the King's Chamber. But in the last year or so, Google Earth has gotten some upgrades, and it's gotten more accurate. And this is within 1 meter of being exact. That's the speed of light, latitude. Now, I'd say most people are aware of Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory from the mid-90s of the belt stars of Orion corresponding with the pyramids, as above, so below. Probably fewer people are aware of Hans Godic's discovery in 1983 of the sight lines, that if you draw a line through those pyramids, it points at Heliopolis, just as in the sky, a line going through there points at Sirius. So this was associated with Osiris, and this is associated with Isis. And so their relationship is here across the Nile. So I realized that Heliopolis must have been very, very important. But unfortunately today, there's really only one obelisk left, and the rest of it is covered with apartment buildings. And I wanted to figure out where is the center of Heliopolis, you know? And I found that out by a method that you'll see in a moment. And here are the coordinates of what I believe is the actual center point of Heliopolis. And it's right there in the middle of that little circle there. And what I did is I assumed that the size of the city had a radius of exactly 1 kilometer. And then I say, well, there's a northern gate of the city with this red line and a southern gate of the city that goes down. And there's also this other line at an angle that goes off from the center point, from this point. And what do those point to? This line goes exactly to the summit of Mount Everest, and it has this length. The northern gate line goes exactly to the North Pole, and it has exactly this length. It's not off by anything. This one too. This one goes from the southern gate of the city to the equator. Do you see that? Isn't that incredible? Now this is Teotihuacan in Mexico, and it also has a kind of Orion correlation theory with the moon pyramid of the sun, and the citadel. And I'm not the first to discover that correlation. Of course, that was known long before in the 70s. I think Hugh Harleston pointed that out. But what I did is I measured that the center point of Heliopolis to this point right here in front, directly in front of the pyramid of the sun, and it's exactly this number here in nautical miles. Okay, 6666.66 nautical miles. That's pretty amazing, right? But then, I know a lot about metrology. I've written books about it. One is called Taking Measure. And in the definition of the nautical mile, they rounded off when they did that. It should be a minute of arc, which is 1851.851 meters. But they rounded it off to 1852. Sounds good enough, right? But if you actually use the real number and don't round it off, it gives you this exact number of meters. 1234565.321. It's a pyramid of number. Do you see that? And it's right there. Okay, so this is information that comes from Mark Reynolds, who I used to teach with at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. And he wrote a beautiful paper on the Great Pyramid, comparing it with the Pyramid of the Sun. And he noted that if you look at the ratio of the base perimeter to the height of the Great Pyramid, it's 2 pi, 99.9% accurate. And if you take the same ratio of the Pyramid of the Sun, it's 4 pi with the same accuracy. So what this tells me is that both pyramids were designed by the same culture or mind. Now this is an example of a long-distance alignment. This is one of the things I do as well, is connect the dots. So if you draw a line from the last remaining structure in Heliopolis, this Temple of Ra obelisk, if you draw that line to the George Washington National Masonic Memorial, the line goes directly over the original Lighthouse of Alexandria, which is now a replica. That's kind of amazing because this building is actually officially a replica of this building. And this is in Alexandria, Egypt. And this is in Alexandria, Virginia. And what is an obelisk anyway? It's actually, this is the Temple of Ra, the sun god. An obelisk is actually a frozen ray of light. So what is a lighthouse? It's something that emanates light. So that's why these are connected like that. Oops, what happened there? There. Okay, so then I'm fascinated by lighthouses all of a sudden. So I look at Paris, because Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval wrote an excellent book called Talisman. They followed that up years later with The Master Game. And in both books, they talk about the wordplay of Faria Isis actually became Paris, okay? And so the City of Light has a lighthouse. It's the Eiffel Tower. And look at how far apart these two structures are. Now, this is actually a replica that the Romans made of the Lighthouse of Alexandria. And it is the oldest lighthouse in the world. It is in northwest Spain, in A Coruña. And it's called the Tower of Hercules. And I thought, well, that's funny, Tower of Hercules. I always thought of Pillars of Hercules, you know. And then I Google it, and I find that there's a new Towers of Hercules in the Bay of Gibraltar in southeast Spain. And it is 330 feet high, 33-foot radii, made in 2009. And look at how far apart these are, center to center, exactly. So you might think, well, maybe this modern architect is, involved in some kind of conspiracy. But belay that thought. Here we have the two tallest structures in the UK and Germany. Look at how far apart they are. 99.98% accurate. I found this one. This is the Cleopatra's Needle in London, and this is where it was before, when it was in Alexandria. Well, judging on the photo in the harbor wall here, you can see right where that was in Google Earth, and look at how far apart they are. From where it was to where it is. And before it was in Alexandria, it was in Heliopolis. Now, a fan of my work who lives in the Netherlands, Shannon van den Heuvel, discovered this when he saw those other lighthouse images. He thought to measure the oldest lighthouse in the Netherlands. He measured it from the center of that structure to this obelisk, and it is exactly this number of meters. Now, this should show you that this can't be a conspiracy, because this was made in 1323, and they didn't have GPS back then. You know? There's a deeper intelligence at work here. So this is the Lighthouse of Alexandria and the Lighthouse of New York Harbor, and they're 333 kilometers apart. By the way, the Statue of Liberty was actually the goddess Isis, and this has gone into in Hancock and Bivall's work. And my friend Jan Tholstrup discovered or noted that the base star on which the Statue of Liberty stands is rotated 33 degrees with respect to north. So it all kind of ties together. I found the official elevation of the Statue of Liberty, and I colorized it here. And I anchored a golden rectangle here on the top of the torch and the bottom of the metal statue. And then these blue lines represent the convergence point of the spiral. You see where that goes in? The third eye. Now, I've written a book on Leonardo da Vinci and how he encoded the golden ratio in his artwork. And here's an example from the year 1490 where he shows the same thing. I've anchored it at the bottom and the top. And the spiral goes into La Ferronnière, which was a piece of jewelry worn in those days, symbolizing the third eye. Here's my analysis of the Last Supper. And this is showing the Great Pyramid slope angle here, and it's anchored on the door frame. And it encodes the all-seeing eye of the sun, S-U-N and S-O-N. And the radiance goes into the ceiling, you see? And then the two golden rectangles here, where at the golden ratio point, they point at eyes. Eyes. Now this discovery was made by this host of authors down here recently. And I made the illustration. Their discovery is that the place where Adam and God's fingers come together is actually at the golden ratio point. In the 90s, Dr. Frank Lynn Meschberger made the correlation between the figure of God and his entourage here and the neuroanatomy. So what Michelangelo was really doing, and this is from my book, so I did a golden rectangle anchored at the bottom and the top of the fresco, and Adam's eye is directly at the golden ratio point here. It points right into the heart of God, which is really the thalamus or pineal gland. It's the third eye, right? So he couldn't let people know that he did this because he would have been in trouble. Now here's Leonardo da Vinci and how he anchored this on the top and the bottom, and the lines here which identify the convergence point line up with the angle of the head. They go right up the bridge of the nose. The third eye is located right there. It's really quite beautiful. And then when you anchor the rectangle on the left and the right, it locates the finger. And he's saying, as above, so below. Or perhaps, as it is in heaven, so it is on earth. Here's another one of John the Baptist, also known as Bacchus. And this is anchored on three sides. And then the finger points exactly at the point of the golden ratio, both vertically and horizontally. And he's saying, as it is, as above, so below. Now, Leonardo da Vinci was actually the first one to encode the golden ratio in art. And That was his genius, is to recognize that the golden ratio really encodes the Hermetic concept in it. And I think he noticed that he was so brilliant to figure that out. And then I traced the secret encoding of the golden ratio through the history of art. So here's the geographer by Johannes Vermeer in the 17th century, and he uses the golden rectangle's primary division here to point at the eye of the geographer and the eye of the compass. As above, so below. And the astronomer by Vermeer, he does the Great Pyramid here. This is the death of Socrates in the 18th century. Very important painting. When Socrates is dying, he points to truth. Where does he point to? The convergence point of the golden rectangle, spiral. It even identifies the angle of his finger. Thomas Jefferson encoded the golden rectangle in this beautiful triple way in his masterpiece of architecture, which is the rotunda at the University of Virginia. And I show it in red, white, and blue. Here's Salvador Dali, and he encodes in his Last Supper. He uses the golden rectangle to locate these figures. And not only that, but he uses a dodecahedron in the background, which can only be constructed by 3 intersecting golden rectangles. So to me, this indicates that Dali must have been aware of what Da Vinci was doing in his Last Supper, and he was kind of riffing off of that. But of course, this is not published anywhere. Now, I noticed that the observation deck in the tallest structure in North America is at the golden ratio point, 99.99% accurate. Again, not published, not mentioned by the architect, but there it is. Maybe the architect isn't even aware of that. That's the interesting question. But here we have the Louvre courtyard. It's a golden rectangle. The pyramid is right at the golden ratio point in 2 ways. The statue of Louis XIV, the Sun King, is right here. It's at the end of the historical axis. This is a masterpiece in so many ways. And I've gone into that in some depth in my Secrets in Plain Sight film, Volume 1. I also show this red geometry here is very, very important. And let me just get into that next. So this is the sacred geometry of Jerusalem. And this was discovered by John Michel, Robin, and Richard Heath. And it's composed of this 5 by 12 rectangle with X's in it. And I found that same geometry in Central Park and on the dollar bill. And in Jerusalem, what it represents is the most sacred place in Christianity, the place where Jesus was crucified, and the most sacred place in Judaism, the Holy of Holies. Okay? So then in Paris, we have the Tuileries Garden. It has the same geometry, and this represents Calvary Golgotha. This represents the Holy of Holies. In Chicago, we have the same geometry here. And the Buckingham Fountain is the end of Route 66. And the distance between these is exactly this number. Also, from that round fountain to the center of the Santiago de Compostela, which is the goal of the Camino, 250,000 people go here every year and look at this, the all-seeing eye of God or providence. It's exactly this far from the center of the fountain. All of these 6s are not just a human conspiracy, they're part of the universe. If you take a hexagon, inscribe that in the earth, you get this many meters here. You know? These numbers, they're part of the universe. Here's Venus, squaring the circle by area, there's the value there. Here's Walter Cruttenden's binary companion. And if the average rate of precession for the great year is 66.66 years. It fits into this. Here's a look at the tip of South America and the tip of South Africa. And if you compare the latitudes, it's a golden ratio. So this is so far beyond human scope. It's evidence of deep patterning. Here's a circle within a square. The square is 27.3% larger than the circle. Well, the moon orbit is 27.3 days. The menstrual cycle is 27.3 days on average. Human gestation, 273 days. We're fundamentally connected to this very simple geometry of a circle and a square. Here's a thing I discovered. The number of times that the Earth rotates in a month is this many times. The number of times that the Earth rotates in a year is this many. If you multiply them, you get this number. It's too perfect, folks. The moon and the Earth, if you compare their diameters, you get this number. If you could do it the other way, you get this number. This is the same as the periods. The sizes and the periods shouldn't be connected, but they are. Here's Saturn. The rings are divinely proportioned with respect to the planet. The axial tilt is usually given here. I take the supplementary angle because it's this number. Patterns are in nature. They're in the things that we make, beautiful things that we make. They're in our bodies. Here's a correlation between the human body, the Great Pyramid, and the golden rectangle. It doesn't work with any other angle. Here it is in the DNA. Golden rectangle, if you compare the major and minor grooves, if you could compare the pitch to the diameter, if you look down the axis, it's everywhere in the DNA. The DNA is like a temple to the golden ratio. So this image is one of my most important discoveries, and this is a powers of 10 scale, okay? This is the whole visible universe. This is our scale, and there's the proton. Well, guess where we are, folks? We're at the golden ratio. And it doesn't mean Homo sapiens in particular, it just means creatures about our size. And incidentally, this is my proportioner instrument, and I just had a successful Kickstarter for that just finished today at 11/11. So 2,000% funded. And this is my last slide. So this is showing the Sphinx and the G2 pyramid behind it arise from the same geometric template. And this may be providence because of the fact that the Sphinx was likely recarved, but here it is now and it fits perfectly. So this geometry here you've seen before, and it's the geometry governing the Great Pyramid. The center of this composition is the third eye of the pharaoh. And we have his headdress locking in this composition that connects it with the Great Pyramid. And then we have what connects these vesica piscis forms are golden rectangles above and below. So here's a recent space telescope image of the engraved Hourglass Nebula, and it exhibits the same geometric template. And this is something that astrophysicists are kind of trying to explain, but not much luck. But I think that the ancients really understood this on a level that we're only getting hints of now. They understood the sacred geometric nature of reality. And this is perhaps best exemplified in the complete Hermetic motto, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. That's a lot of coincidences, isn't it? So let's take a quick break. We're going to start in 10 minutes at exactly 4:05.